So the conversations around large language models are increasing day by day. The number of LLMs and their derivatives be in the form of SLM, which is small language model, or even a fine-tuned model, the number of them and the use cases of them are increasing. Whether you're trying to do a RAG architecture, or you want to fine-tune a model, or you're trying to do something like intermediate, which is like Raft, which recently came about, one key challenge with LLMs is that there needs to be a very strong conversation about evaluation of the large language model. So in this video series, what I'm going to do is I will talk about how can we evaluate the large language model using this research paper, which is a survey paper on evaluation of large language models. Now, a survey paper kind of talks about every technique in that space. So we'll take this video series in chunks. There will be most likely 3 video series. This is the first of it. And this came out like 3 months back. So it's fairly good and complete. There are more libraries that have come up, which I'll talk about in the last video of the series. Let's get started. So as we have just talked, LLMs or large language models are gaining popularity in academia and industry, given the kind of outcomes we are achieving irrespective of the domain you're in. From generation exercises for marketing and social sales related conversation to driving conversations, building chat bots to help your customers get faster and quicker value, to even going into building co-pilots that can help build dashboards. So the limits are just nowhere to be seen. So what this paper has tried to do is it has tried to summarize the success and failure cases of LLMs in different tasks, and they have shed light on different and future challenges that lie ahead in the LLM evaluation. All right, so let's get started and let's focus on the framework that they're proposing. So LLM evaluation is broadly categorized into 4 or 5 key chunks. The first is what to evaluate, and we'll talk about what that means. Second is where to evaluate. Third is how to evaluate. Then there's a summary, and then there are the challenges that they are proposing and talking about. When we talk about what to evaluate, you get into the natural language processing part itself. So you want to understand how is sentiment analysis working, how is text classification working, some inferencing challenges, others, etc., etc. Then you could also want to understand the reasoning capability, the natural language generation capability, be it in the form of translation from a language to another, or summarization, or kind of a dialogue-based assessments. Then as you go multilingual, you would also want to evaluate that kind of with a standard text corpus and see if you are able to get some sense out of it, if the translations are good or not. And lastly, you would probably also go and get deep into factuality. If you're having some sort of a domain specific use case, you might want to be very, very factual in the implementation or in the conversations that lie ahead. The second part could be robustness, ethics, fairness, and trustworthiness. Now, all of these are conversations which are becoming inherently and increasingly important, because as LLMs have been trained on massive amount of data, they might have captured some kind of an inherent bias from the data that they have been trained on, or maybe there's a geographical bias, or they are talking about some sort of hallucination and giving you a perspective which probably doesn't even exist or shouldn't exist. So you will want to evaluate that. The social science evaluation, natural science and engineering, medical applications, all of these are kind of specialized domain specific test cases in the what, and then there are agents and other applications. So essentially what do we need to evaluate is fairly long list. And if you are using LLM, it's very, very important that you find the place as to where you fit in this, and you go and take a deep dive into how you're working towards. Where do you evaluate? Now, you could do general benchmarks, you could do multimodal benchmarks, you could do specific benchmarks. There's numbers like Blue Score, emotion, different sort of Q&A, data sets, etc., etc. How do you evaluate? You can have different sort of evaluation criteria. The most common approach right now in evaluating LLMs is essentially using human evaluation. Second level could be automatic evaluation, which could be done by LLM itself. So there could be a case where an LLM is evaluating the outcome of an LLM. And then you see the benchmark of the evaluations, see the success and failure cases of evaluation, and then you'll talk about the challenges. So this is how this paper is presented. Let's go slightly more deeper into some of the techniques. Now this just is a very interesting number. It just talks about LLM evaluations over time. So in the first few years, so 2021, 22 until 23, like 1, 2, 3 years, there's like 10, 15 papers. And then post that the number has shot up, because as the adoption of large language models is increasing in industry, the need and the necessity to evaluate them are becoming increasingly powerful and necessary also. This is kind of a training process, and a comparison with different machine learning, deep learning and large language techniques as to how would you go ahead and compare them and evaluate them. So in a traditional machine learning, you will have a training data set, you will do feature engineering, you'll have a model complexity which could be limited, interpretability would be good, and performance would be moderate, and hardware requirements could be typically low. And with deep learning, what you have is much more complex model. The feature engineering is kind of automated. You have better performances, arguably better performance, because there's some areas where traditional ML kind of might do better. But in general, deep learning is said to be fairly more complex. But when it comes to LLMs, the dynamics are changing extremely differently. So if you see the training data size, it's very large. The feature engineering is completely automated, very similar to deep learning. Model complexity is increasingly complex. It's very, very complex. And then the interpretability is extremely poor, and performance is though the highest, but again, it can be debated into what sort of use cases. And hardware requirements are just insane for LLM. So the evaluation process for AI models, you have a model, you give it kind of a task, you give it a data, and then you see the outcome and etc. Let's look at some more flows, which I will just scroll through. And yeah, there is this paper is kind of just getting into evaluation across different techniques. Yeah, okay, my bad. Sorry, I think I missed talking about this. Yeah, so when you do, yes, the what to evaluate, right? And this table is where I wanted to come back. So there's different papers that have talked about different techniques, but broadly there are two kind of areas. One is NLU, which is natural language understanding. The second is NLG, which is natural language generation. Within NLU, you have sentiment analysis, you have text classification, you have natural language inferencing, and a couple of other tasks. At the center, you have the ability to do reasoning abilities, and then you get into generation lenses like summarization, dialogue would be there, translation, QA, and other NLG tasks. So different papers have evaluated differently, but I think it's important to understand that even when you talk about NLU, you have to be very specific as to what you are trying to evaluate and benchmark. All right, let's move on to, yes. So the summary of LLM evaluation on robustness, ethics, and trustworthiness. Essentially, different papers here again have talked about it. These three are very well defined metrics, so there's no details to go and talk around them. When we talk about natural sciences and engineering, there's three different areas. So you talk about mathematics, talk about general sciences and engineering. And mathematics could be, how good it is at doing high school math, or engineering level mathematics, can it do logical ability and all of that. Then when you do general sciences, you would evaluate some specific areas, and engineering would be again domain specific. And similarly, what you'll find in this paper is for medical, you'll have medical queries, examination, assistance. Each would be a different kind of type use case, and others are education, search and recommendation, testing, etc., etc. So in a nutshell, there are different focus areas like summary of existing evaluation benchmarks, So when you have a focus on social knowledge, you would evaluate it using social language understanding. You'll have a specific domain. If you have ethic, you will want to do toxicity, bias, and value alignment. Chatbots can be done by leaderboard rankings. Dynamic evaluation could be natural language inferencing, QA, sentiment, hate speech. So depending on the focus area within this space, you will have a different evaluation criteria. And all right, so yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about from the first part. We'll get into the next video, which will talk about where to evaluate on Tuesday. Until then, please subscribe if you have liked this conversation. Comment in if you want to go more deeper in this. We will talk about libraries as well, and there is a possibility of maybe doing a fourth part to this video as well. All right, thank you.